So yesterday we had a presentation which was focusing on narrativizing the livelihoods of daily wage workers back in India for much of the period during the lockdown and the pandemic. Um, the context in which this particular presentation is set by my dear colleague, who's a photojournalist, works in India, is set in the context of the rural and urban migratory waves that you were seeing much during the pandemic years. And it's the subject of migration is very complex, so the way to understand is, for us, what we felt was to spatially study one area which is home to most of the low-income migrant communities in the center or proximity of Delhi. So we're going to talk about this area called Kapashera. You'll see some visuals and some brief descriptions about the area in the notes that are shared. And we'll start first maybe with the video just to give you a sense of the landscape. And then Jignesh and Trisha will talk about the study that was done there. Is that okay? Thank you.
यहाँ पे वर्कर भारत के तो लगभग हर कोने से लोग आते रहते हैं, खास करके यहाँ यूपी के, बिहार के लोग ज्यादा करके यहाँ पे हैं।
कहीं काम नहीं मिल रहा है, जब से लॉकडाउन हुआ है जब से बहुत बुरी भाषा मिल रहा है।
तब जो भाड़ा कर्जा चढ़ा धीरे धीरे पटाएंगे, क्या करेंगे? जब कमाएंगे तभी तो पटाएंगे। अब धंधा तो जब तक जनसंख्या नहीं आएगी तब
तो ऐसा ही चलेगा, तुमको बताऊं। लोगों के अंदर कोविड की वजह से इतना डर बैठ गया था कि वो लोग पैदल यहाँ से गांव जाना शुरू कर दिया उन्होंने।
काम के लिए बहुत काम मंदा चल रहा था, काम कुछ भी नहीं था, लेकिन किसी तरह से काम थोड़ा भी बहुत होता था, उससे पैसा जो अर्निंग हो रहा था उससे घर चल रहा था।
पहले वाली बात तो अलग है, मतलब कि कमाते थे, मेहनत करते थे, कमाते थे। अब तो काम ही नहीं है तो मेहनत क्या करें और क्या नहीं करें, अब क्या खाएं।
Presentation on.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Professor Toby, Michael, and Alida for allowing Trisha and me to speak here online at the conference. There is a slight change. There is a complexity that surrounds visual approaches. Foremost, there is a tension between the potential objectivity and subjectivity of visual techniques and the resulting data. As a photojournalist, my experience have always exposed me to the community's daily life surrounding them. I try to observe for a long time and then try to connect verbally and then through lens. Slight change. As a part of visual research, I consider photograph as a source of data for qualitative research methodology, a way of accessing data and complexities that may not be captured by text or oral language. Slight change. Understanding what happens if I put some key central questions in front of respondents while using photography, videography as a tool. I try and find facts-based visuals and understand how meaning changes with the study. A piece of evidence, basically a conversation around impact assessment and livelihood studies. Slight change. So, as Professor Mohan spoke about daily wage workers yesterday and as exhibited through our visuals, we are happy to take any questions further. I'll tell Trisha to go forward. Slight change.
So our primary research objectives with this study was largely to look at the role of principal wage earners within low-income migrant worker families, look at the precarity of work, their income patterns, consumption patterns, and how they were borrowing, specifically in light of the pandemic, where there was a crunch and there was a debt crisis as well. We also kind of looked at the nature of work that rural, urban, low-income migrants were engaging in, work profiles, and within their work areas, kind of exploitative conditions that they had to endure. Finally, we also looked at gendered perspectives of work while assessing challenges of unionization to migrant women, impact on their health, and again, their intra household bargaining power. Next slide. So, just for some geographical context, Kapashera is located on the northeast side of the Delhi Haryana border. It's a huge migrant area hub with approximately 10,000 people located here, mostly low income migrant laborers who work in extreme physical, extensive work. Next slide. So, post liberalization reforms in India in 1919, there was a rapid surge of industrialization in the border areas of major metropolitan cities. This is how Udyog Vihar, which is a neighboring industrial area to Kapashera, was set up with multiple industries setting up here and hiring cheap labor from rural workers who migrated in search of better livelihood and employment opportunities. Next.
Now, while crossing the borders, state borders from Delhi to Haryana, we call it Kapashira border. Now, there are types of housing facilities that migrant workers rent in different lanes depending on their income. There are juggi shanties, which you call it, semi-permanent rooms, permanent multi-story rooms, 1 to 2 BHK compartments. Now, it is most of these bathrooms are on shared basis, and water availability is metered. Rent varies, location wise, room from 9 to 150 pound sterling. Import export line, garment sector, skilled tailors, loading unloading helpers are staying here in Udyog Vihar near Kapashera. Few others take up informal service jobs, elementary occupations, and graduates, college dropouts are employed in IT call centers, malls, warehouses. Slight change. A common feature for people here is access to social security and low wages, and further oppressed by land resident relationship, which I found it interesting in Kapashera. Landlords are from Delhi and Gurgaon, and everything is treated as a rent making source, right from water to electricity to gas cylinders. And the class is fine with it. Due to city dynamics, it is kind of easy to oppress a vulnerable group that does not find social security. Slight change. Similarly, electricity costs are measured through meters, which are charged through per unit consumptions. Residents try to cut down this by limiting the number of electricity appliances. We could see, a room could only have a fan or a tube light. They couldn't even afford to, put a connection of a TV or a radio. Slight change. Both treated and untreated sources of water are available here, which is quite interesting. The metered aspect, these the taps are meter bound so that the consumption is directly charged by the landlords. These are used for cleaning and washing purposes as it is untreated. Around 77.8% of the household procure drinking water only for treated sources, while 13.13% have partial access to treated water. Slight change. The treated tap water and untreated water tanks are available within the premises, and water jars costing $0.1 are available in the premises. So these were some of the interesting findings which were there. Trisha can do.
Yeah. Next slide. Now we will largely run through the kind of observations and findings we got from our field work with low-income migrant workers. Next slide. As visible through these data charts, we found that most of the primary principal wage earners were men. 87.6% of the respondents that we interviewed were male, and the average age of the respondents was 34. Education levels across respondents differed, with some being literate with basic high school education back in their home states to those without any formal education. There was almost nobody who had formal graduate training. This data also led us to think about insights regarding the evolving nature of work in the region, which appears to be symptomatic of a larger macroeconomic downturn in the informal labor market post COVID 19. The number of unemployed, so when we're saying unemployed, we're referring to those who are actively seeking work but are unable to find any work. So these migrants in our sample saw an 18.75% increase from pre-pandemic levels, where everyone was engaged in one of the varied avenues of tailoring, pressing, thread cutting, button making, and quality checking, which is the predominant worker profiles in the garment export industry that is located in Kapashira. Um, the work conditions in Kapashera we found were very harsh, with workers facing extremely long hours, very low wages, and dismal working conditions. One of the key issues faced by workers was the importance of overtime earnings, which make up a significant amount of their monthly savings. From our analysis of incomes before and after the pandemic, we found for that most workers, their nominal incomes have remained more or less constant, even slightly decreased in case for subcontractual workers because of a diminishing amount of overtime that is available. With rising inflation, it is important to highlight that their real incomes are falling, and rising expenditure on expenses is eating away at any savings that they had managed to make before the lockdown. Next slide. In our analysis of consumption trends, we also observed that in line with increased health issues that was faced by workers in the aftermath of the pandemic, there has also been a proportionate increase in the share of expenditure on medicines and healthcare, with the average share in the sample increasing by almost 10% in this period. This data also re-emphasizes the growing trend of casualization, which is the use of subcontractual workers in place of permanent employees. So in Kapashera, we found that casualization was widespread, with many factories relying on subcontracting labor to fill their labor needs. Um, when these migrants, low-income migrant workers, returned back to Kapashera post lifting of the lockdown, it became increasingly difficult for them to find permanent work, due to which they resorted to subcontractual work. Next slide. In specific, women were overall disproportionately affected by the reduced labor demand, with many of them unable to return to the same level of employment or earn the same income as their male counterparts. This again perpetuates gender equality within the labor force. Next slide. As I previously discussed, even before the pandemic, female labor force participation was largely concentrated in subcontractual or daily wage work, with men holding permanent jobs. As you can see on the screen, this distribution has changed with reduced labor demand, and many of the women who were previously engaged in permanent jobs were now scavenging on daily wages, and others weren't able to find a job at all. In comparison, their husbands found jobs within 1 or 2 months on average after the lifting of the lockdown, while women found it much harder, especially in the semi-skilled sector. The jobs available to women are low paying and require long hours of work, leaving them little time for anything else. Coupled with this, they also had to manage their domestic responsibilities simultaneously, which we found took a very immense toll on their physical health, with women complaining of anemia and weakness. And there were also findings of infertility amongst these women. Next slide. Despite all of this, we found that workers in Kapashera and other industrial areas, they continue to work very hard to make ends meet. They see their work as an important source of income and the only way to support their families. There is a growing need and awareness as well that we found for better working conditions, for fairer wages, and for a more equitable distribution of profits generated by the garment export industry. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Trisha is a law student. She was working on the project, so we thought it might be a good opportunity for her to join in today as well. Thank you for listening, and any questions we can sort of discuss it. Thank you.